So welcome to January Student Educational Talks. My name is Cooper Bailey, and as always, I am your host. We have a fantastic presentation for you, and I will get through our opening remarks rather quickly so we can turn it over to our industry panel. As always, we're going to read our PSO mission statement, and I'm going to have Jonathan Rivera unmute himself, and then please tell us what school you're from and your position, and then we'll have you read our mission statement.
Thanks for that great introduction, Cooper. My name is Jonathan. I am from the University of North Texas Health Science Center down in Fort Worth. I'm a third-year pharmacy student, and I am the president-elect for NCODA's PSO board. And then I'll go ahead and read our mission statement. Our focus is to offer an international community for healthcare students with passion in oncology and pharmaceutical industry. We provide education, leadership, mentorship, and opportunities in research and community outreach. We promote unique and dynamic experiences for students to collaborate with all oncology stakeholders. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. First, as always, I would like to welcome all of our established NCODA professional student organization chapters. We are thrilled to see this list continue to grow as we advance our efforts in educating and inspiring the future generation of oncology leaders. Next, I would like to welcome all students listening in. As you know, NCODA provides our student educational platform to all students, regardless of membership. NCODA is growing by leaps and bounds. We are now 4,500 members and 760 plus practices strong. Working together, we become stronger. Stay up to date on all NCODA student events and resources by following the NCODA Professional Student Organization Facebook and Instagram pages. I will now pause for a quick moment for you to scan the QR codes on your screen if needed. Also, don't forget to follow NCODA's LinkedIn page for all national updates. Next, I would like to highlight NCODA's annual Student PQI competition. Thank you for all of the teams that have already registered. And as a reminder, registration closes this Sunday, January 30th, as our competition kicks off January 31st. We are very excited for this event to kick off, and thank you for all participating. And next, I would like to turn it over to our esteemed industry panel. I will have them introduce themselves individually, but I would like to take a moment to thank all of them for their continued support for NCODA's professional student organization. Panelists, over to you.
All right, thank you, Cooper. And thank you everyone who's here today. As you'll learn a little more as we sort of introduce yourselves, actually a key part of my job is actually working within NCODA. It's an incredibly important organization, and we in particular love partnering with them around students. I know oncology education is something you don't actually get exposed to very much in pharmacy school. So I love that this gives you a venue to actually start delving into these topics and learning more during your student years. And also super excited to see the PQI competition. PQIs are actually incredibly important initiative. And I think they're one that I've been extremely pleased to see how they've grown over time and the actual impact they have on patient care and how they elevate the role of pharmacist. So we're going to jump in. What we're going to do is to start off, we're going to go in order through the panel, and we're going to introduce ourselves and show you guys a little journey line of each of ours to give you a brief background on sort of how we got to industry. And then we've got a set of prepared questions that I'll facilitate with the group. But I also want to keep it interactive, and we should have quite a bit of time for you guys to ask basically Q&A open to the group. Share a document real quick. Oh boy, I'm not used to Zoom, huh? Okay, so I'm hoping that you guys actually can see this on the screen right now. Okay, can someone give me a yes that they see the journey line?
We can see it, Doug. Thank you.
Yay, okay.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go first and then we'll sort of go through the group. And again, this is just sort of give you a background on who we are and how we wound up in industry. So I'm Doug Beeman. I actually, interestingly, I started off my undergrad was in marine biology back in the day at UC Santa Cruz. And I interestingly jumped right into industry after my undergrad. So a little unique there. I spent about 11 years as a biochemist, initially in the Bay Area with Telerik, spent some time down in Dallas with Cumbre, up to Colorado with Myogen, and eventually wound up working with Gilead. And most of that time was in sort of assay development, high throughput screening, and then sort of mode of action type studies around new molecules. I then decided to go back to pharmacy school. I think at the time, my goal was actually to work more on clinical trials. So that was my thinking process that went into pharmacy school. I was at UCSF from 2008 to 2012. And one thing I'll point out is during that time at UCSF, I did do an internship with Genentech. So this was, at the time, it was a managed care medical communication internship that I did between my P2 and P3 year. And I look back at that as actually a very important internship because it both exposed me to a new side of the company, so not the research side, and it also exposed me to medical communication. And I wound up, it taught me that I didn't want to go into MedCom. So it was a good exposure, but it's also sort of set me in the trajectory as heading more toward the commercial side. I then joined, upon graduation, I evaluated both fellowships and direct jobs in rotational programs. And I wound up choosing the Genentech CRDP program, which is the Commercial Rotation Development Program. And it's similar to a fellowship, although it goes for longer and you do more rotations. So I wound up doing actually 5.5 years of rotations, which is a little long. And you'll hear from some other folks on the panel that did probably less time in the program. But I essentially wound up heading down to Texas for my first 2.5 years as a rep. So selling Xolair to allergists and pulmonologists. And I think my one note I'll tell you here is I could not have thought of a scarier, more uncomfortable job is going into a rep role. But I actually wound up learning a ton and enjoying it, hence why I stayed for that long. I then spent a year in a team that trains marketers, so around like tech planning and strategic planning. I do not have an MBA, so part of the reason I did that rotation was to understand the marketing side of the company better. I then headed off to Singapore, spent a little under a year as the regional business analyst there, focused on countries throughout the Asia Pacific region. And so one of the nice things about working like a company like Genentech that has a global footprint through Roche is it does give you opportunities to sort of go into other countries, other markets and learn. And then wrapped up with about a year in portfolio marketing on our lung team. So worked on a lot of provider education initiatives. Following CRDP, I joined into a full-time marketing role where I started off in provider and patient access marketing, spent a couple of years in strategic partnerships, and then actually headed out for a little under a year as a biomarker testing account manager. And you'll hear from one of our panelists later who that is her full-time job. So I sort of dipped my toe in the water, but you'll hear from someone who's a real expert at that job. And then my current role, which I've been in for a number of years now, is within portfolio marketing. And specifically, I manage our engagement and relationship with about 30 different medical professional societies and trade associations, one of which is INCODA. I think the other ones you guys would know really well is like ASHP is one of the groups, as well as HOPA, for those of you who know that, Hematology Oncology Pharmacy Association. What else about me? I grew up in the Midwest, have some dogs, and love travel and photography and cycling, although not so much travel over the last couple of years. So with that, I will hand it over to I believe it is Tina next.
Thanks, Doug. Uh, Hi, everyone. For those of you who might remember me, it's nice to be on the screen with all of you again. I was right before the holiday, I gave a targeted therapies talk, so really happy to be back. So today I thought I would go through a little bit about my background, and when Doug asked me to join this panel, I was more than thrilled since this is a area of passion for me, as you'll see as I walk through my journey line. So I got my PharmD from the University of the Sciences in Philadelphia. And for those of you who know that school, sometimes, the schools tend to focus primarily on one area of pharmacy than the other. Well, USP focused at the time very heavily on clinical. And so, coming from parents who are immigrants, I really kind of went with the flow, so to speak, of where the school was pushing me to. And so during my schooling, when I was third year and on, I was a technician at the Jefferson University Hospital, a pharmacy technician there. That's how I kind of worked on the weekends and learned a lot about the hospital system. After that, I did a pharmacy practice residency out in California over at UCLA. With a specialization in organ transplantation, specifically liver. And after that, I thought I might go for a transplantation fellowship, but after that grueling 1 year, I was like, let me just go and start working. And so I came back to my home at the time, which was New Jersey, and I found a job within one of the hospitals within New Jersey, and was a clinical coordinator in charge of drug usage evaluation, as well as hematology and oncology. So I was a pharmacy preceptor for students, and I did that for about 2 years. And the whole time I was there, I was very intrigued by industry and thought, I had a lot of industry calling on me at the time, and I spoke to a lot of them, and I really admired what they did and thought they had a great quality of life. And so I started to kind of network and just really, try to get an interview and see what kind of ways or avenues I can go to get into industry. So after, it wasn't easy, and I can speak more about that, if anyone's interested, but it wasn't easy, but I finally did get in after about 10 different companies interviewing me. I finally got into Johnson & Johnson. So I kept my hospital pharmacy job while I was working for industry for about 11 years until I got married and had a family, and realized at time I just didn't have enough time after that. So I started off my career in industry with Janssen Northam McNeil in sales in a highly academic environment, which is New York City, and calling on a lot of different academic institutions with a lot of highly, respected thought leaders. Didn't know anything about what I was doing, but managed to do fairly well, probably because I had that clinical training. And then after that, one of my friends recruited me to Genentech, where I was a market specialist. And that role was really interesting because it was really working a lot with the community within hepatology. And I was a speaker for the company. I was a clinical educator for patients and nurses and fellows and residents. And I was helping the company expand the hepatology market, working with a drug called Pegasus at the time. So a really, really interesting job. And that's when I really felt like I could do more and I wanted to learn more about industry. Still not knowing about any of these like CRDP programs or anything. I was looking at all of the other leaders and people that I sort of respected in the field, in the company. And all of them had sales training background, marketing background. So I was like, okay, I think that's where I need to go. And so I started to look for opportunities just sort of in those areas. And that's when I moved over to be a national sales training manager within Allergan. And I specialized at that time in infectious disease, also respiratory and women's health. So I went in-house, I got out of the field, went in-house, did that for a couple of years, was always very intrigued by marketing, managed to do a rotation in marketing while I was in sales training. And then because of that, was able to, get into marketing as a product manager within the same products that I was working on the training curriculum for, and spent about 5 years at that company. The most valuable experience ever. I always tell people I felt like I was going to business school. It was a great company to learn from. I did a lot. I worked my butt off. That was 5 years, but totally invaluable. But I was also, killing myself and commuting a lot. And during that time, I got married and had a couple of kids and was commuting 6 hours a day to this job that I really, really loved. And I just really couldn't keep it up. And so I was, I did some soul searching and I said, let me think about all the companies that I've worked for, where do I really kind of want to grow with, and, kind of build my reputation with, and that was Genentech. So I went back to Genentech. When it wasn't easy, I went back to Genentech in the field, because even though at this time, Genentech is based out of San Francisco, and taking all my experience and going back into the field, it's like a completely different job. And so now I'm back in oncology, and so full circle from when I started my training in a therapeutic area manager role, working with Tecentriq, Alecensa, Rozlytrek, Gavreto. So a lot of different oncologic agents that I'm working with, and a little bit about kind of what I do. It's very different than, just straightforward sales. And that's one of the reasons why I love Genentech, because Genentech's always so innovative, and they're always about like putting the patient first. And I'm really able to use, my sales training background, my marketing background, my clinical background, just everything, like the kind of full circle in the job that I do today. Oftentimes what I do, I'm a customer facing role. And I find that I'm at the table with customers trying to find solutions to help their problems. So that's a big part of my job. Another very important part of my job is to deliver education to them within the products that I am responsible for. So making sure that they are in the know about the products available to them through multiple different resources that the company offers. And that's kind of like what I do now. And, because I still have a long runway, I'm really excited to explore the other opportunities that might be available at Genentech. So just a little bit about me real quick. I had mentioned that I was married, mother of 2. I love dogs. I have a Wheaten Terrier who's 1. She's a pandemic dog. I'm from Chicago originally, but mostly I've spent a lot of time in the East Coast. My hobbies include food, travel, wine, scuba diving. I'm really into wellness and balance. I think that's really, really important for our lives. And a sort of a professional hobby is mentoring and career coaching. So I'm right where I'm supposed to be. So I'll pass it over to my next colleague, which I'm not sure who's going next. Doug?
Yeah, thank you, Tina. And I love sort of your story about going back into the field and what it's like too, because like I think the things you highlighted remind me of why I actually enjoyed in the field and sales, right? It's often not what people picture, but it's that education and connection piece is so sort of important and empowering. Okay, up next, I'd like to introduce Aditi.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. As Doug mentioned, my name's Aditi, and you're going to see a little bit of a theme and overlap between all the panelists here in one way or another. For example, like Tina, I grew up in, or had some time in New Jersey. I grew up there, born and raised Jersey girl, and also went to University of the Sciences, which is, recently acquired by St. Joe's, so might have a different name now. But I went to the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy, University of Sciences, and really thought I knew exactly what I wanted to do when I was in my P4 year. I was going to be an ID pharmacist. I was going to specialize in HIV care. But I had a curiosity to learn more about different industries and organizations just to understand how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. And a series of events led me to a career in managed care. In particular, I did a fellowship in managed care where I worked with some of the institutions you see here, like CMS, Boston Healthcare, Virtua. At CMS and PACE, I was a pharmacist, essentially. I sat on the P&T committee. I developed drug monographs. I made recommendations to the P&T committee, and really understood how decision-making was happening at a sort of formulary level. I also got to work with physicians on, assessing their adherence to those formularies. So for me, that was a natural progression from my PharmD into this managed care realm. But that's when things started to change a little bit when I went over to virtual healthcare and started working with the hospital chief pharmacy director, the hospital CFO, looking at the business side of offering healthcare. So trying to figure out if our community oncology clinic, for example, financially fit into the picture of what the system wanted to do, and making recommendations based off of what we were learning from the business and the analytics behind that. And then I also worked at Boston Healthcare Associates, which was probably the most distinct opportunity during my fellowship, where Boston Healthcare Associates, they're a boutique consulting firm, or they were at the time. And I supported the launch of a diagnostic by developing cost-effective modeling and value messaging. But also there, I got to work with a lot of PharmDs and physicians too, to interview them and understand sort of what are the paradigms related to that diagnostic and what are some of the key sort of features and benefits they need to see from a clinical perspective so we can launch that diagnostic. Ultimately, all that experience led me to Genentech, where I also participate in the commercial rotation development program like Doug. And just a comment around that, a lot of suppliers actually have these rotational development programs. They might be called something else, like a leadership development program, a marketing pipeline program. So keep your eyes open for those if that's something you're interested in. They do recruit primarily MBAs, but they do look at PharmDs, PhDs, MPHs also. So that opportunity in the commercial rotation development program really allowed me to learn a lot of different functions within Genentech. And you see 2 Genentech bullets here for me. They aren't linear, but I'll talk to you about some of the experiences I had. Similar to Doug, spent a lot of time in marketing, focused on our cross bio-oncology portfolio, but also worked on specific launches related to Tecentriq. And then later moved on to a different drug, which was in a different life cycle, has been on the market for a long time, had a lot of competition, and that was Rituxan and Actemra in immunology. And marketing is really cool. At its fundamental level, what you're trying to do is drive education and awareness to all of the stakeholders in the care paradigm. That might be the prescribing physician, it might be the payer developing the formulary, or it might be the patient on the receiving end of the product. And so marketing touches on all of that and figuring out how do we drive education awareness for all of those stakeholders in that treatment paradigm. The biggest change for me was pivoting from marketing to pricing, contracting, and distribution strategy. I think Tina said it nicely. It was like getting a live MBA basically through work experience. That for me was actually one of the scariest jumps I've ever made in my career, because although I've had projects where I worked on modeling and developing value and some of those, I knew that jumping into the pricing, contracting, and distribution strategy job was going to be heavy math, like deep analytics, deep modeling, and really understanding the flow of the dollar within the healthcare system. And that learning curve really allowed me to learn the nitty-gritty of our healthcare system and the flow of the dollar. And I also got to work on some drugs that NCODA may be familiar with, like Cellcept and Tarceva, so some of the oral oncolytics. And then I also had experiences in commercial training and development, making more competitive programs like the commercial rotation development program, and got to go to Mexico. That's why we have the Mexican flag there, to work with their clinical operations team. And that was a leadership role where I got to work on change management with their ClinOps team and help improve processes for the stakeholders on that team. Really cool. And then where I am today and where I've been for the last 3 years is in the field in an account management role. And account management is a little bit different than sales representative or clinical specialist, because I'm not focused on one or two brands. I cover our entire portfolio, and I'm responsible for developing sort of the B2B engagement, the business to business engagement between us and different managed care stakeholders. So in my previous life, include Medicaid, included payers, included distributors and specialty pharmacies. In my life today, I primarily work with national health systems and group purchasing organizations that represent or work on behalf of national health systems. So I know that's a little bit of a complex subject, but to give you an example of things we might work on, they're really around the triple aim. So how do we improve cost, quality of care, and sort of the benefit that the patient sees, and developing programs to address that. So sometimes it might be as simple as thinking about a contracting initiative. How do we reduce the barrier to entry so that you can stock the product and bring it and infuse your patients that you see in the hospital, for example, or in the clinic that you work in, for example. And then it could go beyond that. Like, for example, I work with Nadia, who you're going to hear from in just a second here, on evaluating where there might be biomarker testing opportunities and where can we educate and work with physicians on a broader scale to ensure awareness of biomarker testing and rolling out that education on a larger scale with national health systems. So that's a little bit of where I ended up. On a personal note, I never in my life imagined I would be in California, which is what the job at Genentech entailed, moving out to California from New Jersey. Like I said, I was a Jersey girl through and through, but I loved moving to California. It was a big, scary change. I met the love of my life out there. I don't think I would have met him otherwise. And yeah, I love the wine tasting that comes with living in Napa and the outdoors, just hiking and all that fun stuff. So with that, I will pass it to Nadia.
Sounds good. Thanks, Aditi. It's been nice learning about all of you, all of your journey lines too. So hi, everyone. My name is Nadia Huck. So just to begin, I feel like I might have more of the, sort of like the most probably traditional clinical path here. But it's been a minute. I just was looking at my thing and I'm like, okay, graduated in 2004. I don't know if I want to say that out loud, but so I graduated pharmacy school from Wayne State in Michigan and Detroit in 2004. From there, I took the residency route. So I did a first year PGY1 residency at Sinai Grace Hospital, which is part of the Detroit Medical Center. And then I ended up doing a second year PGY2 at Henry Ford Health System in Detroit, in critical care, kind of actually with a concentration sort of in infectious diseases, and sort of had an unconventional role after that. I was sort of tasked with starting the internal medicine clinical pharmacy specialist position at Henry Ford. They didn't have one at the time, but there was only half-time funding, as all of these things sort of go. So I ended up being a half-time internal medicine pharmacist and a half-time research coordinator in infectious diseases. So I worked for about 5 years with the head of infectious diseases at Henry Ford, where we did a lot of outcomes research on MRSA infections. So that was actually like sort of my first true exposure to the pharmaceutical industry way back when, close to graduation, so where we were multiple investigator-initiated outcome studies with multiple companies, did a ton of publishing and that sort of thing. From there, I sort of just left the ID world and became a pharmacy manager, a residency program director, a residency surveyor, kind of went into the pharmacy world for a few years. In that time, I kind of got very interested in management. And so kind of wanted to see sort of the bigger picture. I was working at this large health system. They owned a payer, a large medical group, kind of wanted to see sort of how, and I knew pharmacy fit into so many different sort of avenues and within the health system. And I sort of wanted to put all those things together. So I went back to school to do my master's in health services administration from the University of Michigan. And I took another kind of step back to do an administrative fellowship after that, because that administrative fellowship was with the C-suite of Henry Ford Health System. So I worked very closely with the CEO of the system, the CEO of the Henry Ford Medical Group, just to understand bigger picture health system strategy and sort of think about where healthcare was going, what was happening with population health, physician strategy, and that sort of thing. From there, worked kind of as a chief of staff with the CEO of Henry Ford Medical Group after I graduated the fellowship. And then Henry Ford Cancer Institute was being built. So they just built a cancer institute that opened a year ago, and they were beginning a precision medicine program. And so I was asked to be the administrator of that program and kind of build it from the ground up in terms of, building out a molecular tumor board and getting data together and creating care pathways and working on quality and finance initiatives and things like that. There was not a clinical person at that time, so I sort of straddled between the clinical and the administrative role then. That was a lot. And so I also have 3 kids, which I'll tell you about. And so I ended up actually leaving Henry Ford after a long time. It was 15 years, just decided it was time for a change, and took a job at Wolters Kluwer, which many of you know owns LexiComp. And so I wrote pharmacogenomics content for a couple of years there. I kind of stayed on at Henry Ford as a consultant, but really that was my full-time job. But when I was at Henry Ford, I was actually a customer. When I was in the precision medicine program, I was a customer of Genentech's. And so we had even done like a panel presentation and all this stuff. And I met a few people from Genentech and kept in touch with them. And they told me about this job on the biomarker testing team, which is where I'm at now. Joining a team that helped physicians, precision medicine programs, lab personnel, pharmacists, basically anyone involved in cancer care to increase access to biomarker testing in cancer patients, sort of helping patients or helping ensure that patients receive the right testing. So I'm on the biomarker testing team. It's a national team. There's about 30 of us around the country. A few different industry or companies in the industry have similar roles. We'll talk, I think, more specifics about this role coming up. And also just in the top corner, I recently started coursework in health informatics at Johns Hopkins as well. I'm from Detroit. I told you about my kids, Zaid, Zara, and Nyla. It's been about a year and a half for me at Genentech, and I love to work out, travel, I love listening to podcasts and reading. And from here, I will pass it to CJ.
Hey everyone, surprise, another U Sciences student or former student here. Happy to be here. Appreciate the opportunity, Doug and Coda. My name is CJ Drost. I obviously am also an employee here at Genentech, and I'll try to go a little quick through my timeline so we can allow for more Q&A at the end. And since there's some overlap with my journey line, as you've already heard from Doug and Aditi, I went right out of high school to University of the Sciences, as it was a program structured like that. So I actually entered pharmacy school not knowing that I could really do anything other than dispense medicine from behind the counter at CVS or your local mom and pop shop. And that's what I thought I would end up doing for the first maybe 2 years of pharmacy school. Maybe at that point, my highest ambitions was someday I'm going to own my own pharmacy. And then I started doing my MBA throughout pharmacy school as well. And I quickly realized how vast our healthcare system is, and how vast PharmDs are in terms of opportunities all throughout our healthcare system. And as I started learning more about actual health outcomes and the drugs and what data goes into clinical decisions, I realized how much it's not just what comes out of the clinical trials and you might learn in your textbook that dictates what a patient actually gets prescribed. So I quickly realized I want to know more about all the different players within the healthcare system. I want to know the specialty pharmacies, the payers, the PBMs, the health systems and all their different entities, and the manufacturers, and how if one of those entities makes a decision, how it impacts one of the others, how it impacts the prescriber, the HCP's ability to what they're actually allowed to provide a patient, and then how it impacts the patient down the line. So that's kind of the nature of what really drove me into the fellowship I did post U Sciences, which was actually the same as Aditi. So you'll see some overlap in some of the rotations we did there, like Boston Healthcare. And I'll just say how much I really did enjoy that Boston Healthcare rotation, as well as Aditi said, because you don't really learn a lot about the diagnostics in pharmacy school. And that was the first time I started learning about IHC and FISH and NGS, next generation sequencing, and it provided kind of a new window into the care paradigm that prior to the actual drugs getting prescribed. Did a couple of other rotations. I had also worked at CVS for 6 years throughout pharmacy school. Had probably been at almost 30 different pharmacies by the time I was graduating, and knew that industry was the route I was going. I forget if Aditi said it earlier, but the fellowship we did, it was structured in a way that we knew at the end of it, we were going to segue into the CRDP program at Genentech. So after a year rotating between companies in the fellowship, came out here to San Francisco, started with Genentech and CRDP, and I jumped around 4 rotations before landing ultimately where I'm at now. And I joined Genentech actually at a really interesting time in 2017, where we started undergoing a transformation of the company, which I won't dig into too much, but I'll say if you are ever at a large company, whether it's pharma or anything, if you're there while a company is undergoing transformation, it'll totally change how you operate day to day and your outlook on different roles and how you might hop between them. So it's very interesting. My role at the time, specifically there, was aligned to some of our higher powered account managers that were calling on the C-suite of health systems and regional payers, the state Medicaids and regional PBMs as well. It provided a lot of operation and analytics support for them for a strategic lens, but also how they could engage with all the other suite of field roles, whether it's what we call a TAM now, but a sales rep, biomarker type roles, and others. So there was a lot of field coordination aspect of that. And from there, I did a rotation that was similar to that, aligned to the same team, but took a little bit deeper dive and focused on a specific region within the southeast and the northeast of the country, and did a lot more heavy analytics, looking at the actual policies, payer formularies, drug performance, focusing on which of our drugs across the entire Genentech portfolio was going to be our focus area within a specific account. And from there, I stuck within the portfolio side of Genentech, but had moved over into a portfolio marketing role, at which point I was actually on Doug's team for almost a year. And it was my first time in a marketing role. So it was new to me. And I was aligned, even though I covered the entire Genentech portfolio of drugs, I was aligned more specifically to a customer type, GPOs, which is group purchasing organizations. So on behalf of our brand marketing, I was helping to place a lot of our education and marketing efforts through that specific channel of group purchasing organizations. And from there, I actually rotated into the current team I'm on, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a bit, but just kind of end there. At the moment, covering Gazyva, as you can see, from an inline brand marketing role. And I believe that's one of our questions that's going to come up in a bit. So I'll actually pause there. I missed the memo on the about me, but I see the time clicking. So I'll let us move on to the next section.
CJ, thank you. So what I'm going to do, actually, let's actually, I'm going to go ahead and ask you that question. I know that's slightly out of order, but I feel like the other folks did give some sense of a day. So go ahead and tell us, tell us a little bit about your current role, like what are the types of projects you're in, and potentially what a day looks like. If that is it even something you can describe?
Sure. We discussed this a little bit before, and I thought it was a good idea to, right before I kind of tell you exactly what my day-to-day looks like, a little bit more of a briefing on marketing maybe at a pharmaceutical company. I think it's important to note that this is kind of a generalization of marketing, and it really will vary from company to company. When you're at a very large company like Genentech or maybe Johnson & Johnson or Merck, you'll see that there's more specificity in an individual's role and title. But if you're at maybe a smaller startup biotech or one with a smaller overall portfolio, you'll find yourself wearing many hats as an individual, or depending on what your title is. But a generalization, I think we can look at marketing maybe in 3 different ways. You have your inline type roles, where you're aligned more directly to a specific product, a drug, or a therapeutic area. And then you have maybe pipeline marketing, where it's a little bit earlier on in the product's development lifecycle before it's actually FDA approved. And then portfolio marketing, where you've heard a little bit about, but generally you're going to be aligned to the company's full portfolio and maybe aligned either to broad initiatives or to specific customer types like payers or pharmacy benefit managers, or like me, I was aligned to group purchasing organizations. So on that front end, inline marketing is where I'm currently at. I'm on our hematology marketing team. And within that, we have a whole suite of drugs in hematologic malignancies. So I'm even more specifically on our lymphoma marketing team, covering 2 products in follicular lymphoma. And then even within a given therapeutic area marketing team, you're probably going to see an individual marketer covering specific areas. And a general way to think about them would be your HCP marketer. So your marketer who's covering developing the resources and content and messaging that's targeting to your HCPs, whether that's your MDs or your nurses or your PharmDs. And then another area might be your patient marketer, who's really developing a lot of the educational materials that's directly going to the patient. Your key customer marketer, who is calling on your KOLs, your key opinion leaders. At Genentech here, we call them thought leader liaisons. And then the fourth bucket within a traditional brand or inline marketing role would be your access marketer. And that day-to-day is looking a lot more like your educational and marketing resources targeted directly to managed care entities or customers, like your payers, your PBMs, your specialty pharmacies. So myself, I'm in a pretty unique and what I think is a cool opportunity in that I cover Gazyva, which is later in its life cycle. So I get to be in a type of role where, as if I was in a smaller pharmaceutical company, and I get to be the only marketer covering Gazyva in follicular lymphoma and wear all those kind of hats for the HCP, the patient, the key customer, and the access type of marketing. And then I also get to be on a launch brand. So I'm working on a product called mosunetuzumab, which is not approved yet. So it's actually really exciting to be involved in a product, thinking about the strategy, what we need to educate the customer, the care paradigm, all the customers out there on the product before the product even comes to market. And within that area, it takes a whole host of individuals to bring a product to market. So I don't wear as many hats. I'm a lot more specified in my day-to-day in access marketing. And that's really looking at developing the resources on anywhere from billing and coding to what our messaging from our economic value proposition looks like that will be going to health systems and payers and such with.
Awesome. Thank you, CJ.
Yeah.
I just love hearing that story too. And I think for folks to realize, like, it shows how quickly, in a way, in the types of projects you're going to be taking over sometimes in industry. Like, so the fact that CJ, as he said, he sort of says that as a good thing. I'm sort of, I feel for him if he is the only marketer doing that. But if you think about that, like that blows me away that we have a PharmD in this role, not that far out of his sort of fellowship opportunity. That's now our lead marketer, sort of covering that product. So very cool. So based on timing, you guys have to be prepared because I'm going to jump around on questions a little bit. So, So the next one, because I want to get to something I know folks are wondering, is I want to ask about what you did during pharmacy school to prepare for what you were going to do afterwards. And I'm going to start actually with Tina. So Tina, can you tell me what are some of the things you think are important to do, maybe what you did, or based on reflection, what are some of the things you think would be important to think about in pharmacy school if you're looking toward industry?
Yeah, in reflection, because I feel like if I could have turned back the time and known where my interests and strengths lie now, I would network as much as you can with the pharmaceutical industry folks. These big conferences and communities like NCODA, ASHP, any of these pharmacy conferences where you can network and go and visit the booths of the industry and ask questions to the folks that are representing the companies there. I would do that. I think like one of the biggest things with industry, in any industry, is your network, right? And so that's one of the things that I would, that I would do. And that's ultimately how I got into industry. When I was practicing as a clinical pharmacist, I networked with all of the representatives that came in and called on me, and I asked a ton of questions. And what do I need to do? How do I prepare? And depending on where your interest lies, like if it's going into commercial or going into a pharmacy, or maybe you want to do a program, one of these CRDP programs, or apply for a fellowship. Whatever you're doing now in pharmacy school, make sure you're thinking about the skills that you might need for those programs, and start really sharpening that particular skill. So that's what I would recommend.
Thank you, Tina. And I love that idea of actually going to the conferences and thinking about the commercial booths. That is not something I would have ever thought about in pharmacy school. It was almost like, oh, we have to go to CHP in mid-year and exams are happening and I don't want to deal with this. So such a good tip there. Aditi, I'm going to ask you the same question. What did you either do to prepare, or in reflection, what do you think would be an important tip for students to think about?
Yeah, I totally agree with Tina. And in line with that, I think there's three things I think about that are critical if you want to, any career really, and especially if you want to go into industry. The first is get exposure. Like learn more about industry, what different roles you could have. Go, if you can, do a rotation, a summer internship, shadow someone if they're open to it, to learn more about the different roles that they have. That's really, remember I told you guys I wanted to be ID pharmacist. I shadowed someone in sales and marketing at a pharma company. And after that, a spark went off and I was like, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. So the more exposure you get, I think the more you're going to learn about different opportunities. Totally agree with Tina on the networking. I remember one year I couldn't afford to go to HP. I was a broke college student, and I worked my tail off leveraging the connections I had within ASHP, ASP, like my friends that I had, different chapters I was involved with, my professors or friends that I know graduated recently, to build some connections and set up informational one-on-ones. Call it that. Set up 20 minutes with someone, or even 15 minutes if you can get it, to learn more about their job and industry, what they're doing. And likelihood is that they'll know about an open role on their team or within their company, or can connect you to someone. So that networking piece is so important. And then I don't know if I could say this, but shoot your shot. That's the last thing, right? Like apply, put yourself out there. And it's not always the fellowship route or a development program route that you need to go by. There are many entry-level positions within pharmacy or pharmaceutical industry. Apply, take your shot, see if you can get that opportunity and build some experience to work your way up into bigger and broader roles within the industry.
Nice. Thank you, Aditi. And that was okay that you said that. No, I'm kidding. So Yaz asked a question in the chat, and it was, what skills would you say are most vital? So I'll take a stab at this, Yaz. And then anyone on the panel, free to add in if I missed a key one that stands out to you. I think number one is communication skills, right? Like, so that is not a focus of pharmacy school, right? And it becomes very apparent once you're done, like who put the time in to sort of improve their pharmacy skills or communication skills. You can do that through class, you can do that through your rotations. Any of those moments, that's going to be one of the biggest things that gets you through those initial interviews. I think the other big one is, I think a lot of pharmacy school training is, didactic. Here's the info, you learn it, get to a point where you can sort of regurgitate that, you know what I'm saying? And so you need to shift your thinking into, how am I evaluating something from a strategic lens, or an overall, what is the problem and how am I trying to solve that underneath, regardless of what I've already learned? And I think that takes a little bit to sort of shift that type of thinking. That's the two I'll put out there. Does anybody else on the panel have a key skill you think is super important to develop?
I'll add something. I would also say it depends on the role, right? And I agree with Doug. Communication and teamwork and collaboration are probably the number one things that Genentech really values. I'll give you an example, right? Like when I tried to break into industry, so let's say like I was trying to get into sales, right? Because I wanted to be in the field and I wanted to learn about the business. And so all of the people that were interviewing me were like, you have no sales skills, and so that's why it took me so long. I try to tell them that every day on rounds, I'm selling my recommendations to the doctors. So you kind of have to spin, depending on like the type of role that you're going for, you kind of have to think about what you currently do and how can you match the skills that you do now to the skills that they're looking for. Another example is I have a friend who's now the VP of regulatory, graduated same school as I, and she did a rotation one summer at the FDA, and she just stuck with that compliance track. So that got her in the door, with the legal or regulatory track. Sorry, it's regulatory, not legal, but it's regulatory track. And then she got into industry that way. And then she just kept like on that linear track. And then she climbed all the way to the top to VP. So, it just depends on where you want to go and the skills that particular job is looking for.
Perfect. Nice answer. And I like that idea too, of like taking your current experiences and thinking about how they translate over. I had the same experience when I was trying to go into sales. My manager was like, what have you sold? You've sold something before, right? I'm like, no. And it took a while to realize, no, it's actually a skill we have done. We just don't think of it that way. And I'll say every PharmD I know that has gone into a customer facing sales role does great. So it's like, we have that skill set. We just don't always think so. Okay, this is going to be a fast one. I know there's always questions about how do you think about what do you do after school? Or do you do a fellowship? Do you do a residency? Do you do something else? I'm going to push this one over to Nadia. So how did you think about this, Nadia? And what's the kind of advice you might give to someone trying to think through this problem?
Sure. I thought about it like, I feel like there's going to always be sort of more to do. And how do I put myself out there and kind of rise to the top or whatever. So that's why I ended up doing the PGY 1 and 2 and the additional fellowship. And I can't say, yes, it's a step, where it's like you don't make as much money and all this other stuff, but I can't say enough about all of those experiences because I think you learn the broader, bigger picture. I think you're in terms of expanding your network, that's probably like the number one thing. And I think all of those training opportunities give you some experience in thinking strategically. So like that's probably what translated the most, both in network and thinking strategically from post-grad training to current roles.
Perfect. I like that answer, Nadia. And I think, I think oftentimes students are saying like, okay, do I have to do a fellowship or something? I think hopefully what you've seen today is you don't, right? There's so many different roles. It really is going for something and then really investing yourself in it and being fully engaged during that experience. I think the one thing I'll say, the one advice I do give is if you have any interest in a clinical residency, like do it because you're not going to come back. I mean, I know maybe someone will, but I think 4 years out, you're not going to have the energy or the whatever brain power to do it. So that's the one thing I say first, only if you're dead set on that experience. Okay, we're getting close to time. So one thing I want to do for you guys is I'm going to be sharing, afterwards I can share a slide with the Encoda team that they can send out to you guys. And it's got some links to various fellowships and programs at Genentech. Maybe I will, how do I do this? Oh yeah, I'll show it to you actually right here. That's CJ. Next slide. Okay, so real quick, these are sort of Genentech focused. So we do have, for during school, we actually have an AMCP managed care internship. And when I send you the slide, you can also go, these are super easy to Google and find. So that's, I think it's like a 10-month internship. I think they might have just closed applications for the next year, but this is an ongoing one and they also happen through different schools. The other ones we have are fellowships. So these are postgraduate ones. We, first off, that first one, I didn't actually slightly write the link best, but that's the Rutgers Pharmaceutical Industry Fellowship Program. So if you're thinking about industry fellowships, you got to look at the Rutgers program. It's massive. I think we at Genentech have 14 spots for the 22 to 24 cohort. A couple other fellowships we have at Genentech is one with UOP. We also have a UCSF Genentech Clinical Development Fellowship with two of my favorite professors there, as well as the UNC PK/PD Modeling Fellowship. Both of those last ones are more to gear you over to the research side, but definitely wants to check out. And then I'll include a link for the Genentech rotational programs. You heard a couple of us that did the commercial rotational program, but there's other ones. There's the operation rotational development one. There's one in finance. I've actually met a lot of PharmDs that came in through that route as well as a lot of engineering students. So they're all great options. And as Aditi pointed out, many companies have these. So the key is to just sort of search on like leadership rotational program. If you see it's just MBAs, dig a little further, because as a PharmD, you're probably just as qualified. And then IPHO, so I just want to point out, like, they are a fantastic resource for really understanding the breadth of fellowship opportunities that are out there. Okay, I'll stop sharing again, but I'll send you these guys' slides. Any other burning questions? Let me open it up. Is anyone brave enough to ask a question in the last few minutes we have here? If not, I'll do a final fast question to the round.
I actually had one question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that if you have the opportunity to do a clinical residency, do it, because it'd be hard to go back. And so all the panelists had some clinical experience and then went to transition to industry. So do you think that it's also possible to go from industry to work at a clinic, or is it only easy to transition from a clinic to industry?
That's an interesting question, Javier. So I would say it would be hard to go to industry and then come back into like a full clinical role. Like, it would be hard to go back and see, like, I'm going to be on the floor as a clinical pharmacist in an inpatient setting. And I think it's hard just because of the people you would be up against for the job at that point, and literally your ability to function in that environment after you've been out of it for that many years. I would love to get anyone else on the panel have a different opinion on that one.
I agree completely. I think it'd be hard to go back. I mean, it's probably not impossible, but then there's all sorts of people that already have that experience, probably doing that exact same thing, that are likely to get those jobs, more likely to get those jobs.
I will say the one area I do see it is, like, if you were going to work for a health plan, so not a like inpatient clinical role, but more working for like a health plan or a managed care role, that you see people sort of move back and forth from. But
or
I
maybe
think
specialty pharmacy, Doug.
SPs for sure,
Yeah.
totally. But like a full-on like clinical role, that you might, but it's going to be tough. And also, there's not that many of those roles. So now I said you're competing with people that are like doing that full time.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, no, I would also say that, like, I still keep in touch with some of my clinical friends, and having done the clinical side and then going into industry, I think that if I wanted to go back to clinical, I probably could, just because of the network I have now, and because people know my work ethic, and because you specialize in certain therapeutic areas still. And it's just about selling your skills and how you can relate it back to what you would be doing in the clinical role. So there is also a shortage. There's also a shortage of like very qualified pharmacists, especially in New York City. So I think it also depends on, market trends and stuff like that.
I love that. And I think that's also, like, I'll add this, I think that's reflective of the fact that Tina actually has a strong clinical background too. So on the flip side, here's what I'll say. Someone like me who has zero, or someone who just did a little bit of time, probably harder. But I like that answer, and it goes back to like the power of the network. Okay, so here's your final super fast. Oh, good. Yeah, so super fast question. What is your favorite thing about working in industry or during your day-to-day? So Tina, go.
My day is different every single day, and I love getting to know new people.
Love it. Nadia.
It's been a really interesting shift in terms of culture, work-life balance, and the people in the industry.
In a good way, right?
Very much.
Kidding.
Especially working with you, Doug. And Aditi.
CJ, what's your favorite part?
Every day is something new. I have more questions asked to me every day than I have answers, and I just have to go find the answers. So it's nonstop learning.
Perfect. Aditi?
I would say the same as Tina and CJ. Another thing that's been great is just the ability to work on big scale projects that are going to influence a lot of patient lives to the better, which I didn't have the opportunity to do when I worked at CVS, for example.
Nice. Okay. Well, with that, I want to say a huge thank you to the panel. These folks all joined us, many of them from, our group here is spread all over the country. Folks are at different time zones and they're sort of hopping on to do this out of work. So just huge thank you guys. And I just want to say thank you to Encoda, really for having us here today. And thank you for the entire pharmacy school outreach and programs you're doing. I think this is hugely important. I think one of my messages to Encoda has been, I've also been impressed with the sort of breadth and diversity of the pharmacy schools you're pulling into the fold, right? And I really want this type of insight and learning to reach all pharmacy students across the country. We'll be providing our contact info, so you can look us up, reach out to us if you have questions. And I don't know if I'm allowed to use, I'm going to put a plug in. So definitely look forward to the Encoda PSO annual meeting at the end of this summer. Hopefully some of us will be there and we can meet in person. With that, I'll turn it back over to Cooper.
Perfect. Yeah, again, thank you so much to all of our presenters tonight. It was a fantastic event. We had a great student. Thank you to all the students as well. So we'll go ahead and get things finished up quickly here. Just a shout out, tune in next month, February 23rd, 8 p.m. Eastern time. Again, we will have a special presentation. So one of our students actually, and I know Doug talked about expanding pharmacy schools, but one of my favorite initiatives are international initiatives. So we actually have a student coming in from University of Toronto, up in Canada, we'll be presenting on cancer care in the LGBTQ plus community, along with another fantastic presentation. So make sure to tune in next month. On behalf of myself and the entire Encoda team, we thank you for your continued participation and support for our student educational talks. My name is Cooper Bailey. We'll see you next month. Thank you.